Hello.
Hey, Chris, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Well, welcome everyone. Um, I was thinking this morning about, I always spend a little time in the morning thinking about what could I possibly talk about? What words could I find this morning to start us off? So um, I think we could say that the lion's share of um, spiritual teachings and other sort of psycho-spiritual self-help kinds of things that are out there in the world, many of which we've partaken of, I'm sure, along our paths and journeys. Um, they kind of take the form of what we could call the life improvement project in some way. So we've got this thing, call it life, and we're trying to do something through the way we're engaging with it, um, the way we're exploring it, what we're reading about it, what we're practicing, and so on, to try to improve upon it in some way, to make it better, to um, yeah, to make it better. And built into that is an assumption, obviously, that something about it isn't quite right, that something about it needs to be improved upon, needs to be repaired, needs to be fixed. And um, so that whole approach, which again I think it seems to define most of the spirituality that's out there in the marketplace, even if it's subtle. Um, the approach that I'm taking in my work is really quite distinct, in that it's not about improving life, but rather exploring what life actually is. So we're not really starting from the assumption that there's something to improve. It's more a spirit of curiosity about, well, here we are, and what is this? What is that? What is this that we find ourselves in the midst of, that we have all sorts of names and descriptions for, including, of course, the one we imagine ourselves to be that's in this, whatever this is, the world, experience, and so on. But let's just take a step back and investigate, explore, well, what is this? What is this thing we call life? And that, from my perspective, is the most astonishing exploration, and endlessly astonishing, endlessly um, illuminating, and also great fun, I might add too. I don't see it as a heavy, overly serious exploration, actually. I kind of find myself and encourage others to come to it more in the spirit of a childlike curiosity and wonder about this. And that's how we approach life when we sort of came into the world, it would seem, with that kind of wonder and awe and curiosity. Like, well, what the child looks at the reality it encounters, and it hasn't encountered it before, at least not in this lifetime. So it's got, the child brings to it this sense of like, wow, what is this? What's going on here? What is this? Everything that it perceives and encounters. And we really are in the exact same place, in a sense. Here we are. What is this? What is this? And so that's what I'm always inviting, the bottom line. No matter what we might be saying about what's going on here, no matter how we might be describing it, no matter how we might be characterizing it, what is it actually? What is this? And the simple way to explore that question is not in an analytical way, but in an experiential way, which is, in a very real sense, just feeling your way into that answer of that question, what is this? So let's just do that for a few minutes together, when we're really doing it all the time anyway. Everything that's happening experientially, we could say, is reality exploring itself through experience, life exploring itself, the divinity, if you will, exploring its nature. So just as you're sitting here, your eyes can be open or closed, it doesn't matter. Just feel the simple presence of life itself, your own your own being. And really the beingness of everything, the existence of anything. Feel that as the presence of it. The presence of thought is the beingness of it, the existence of it. The presence of what we might describe as feelings and sensations is the existence of it, the aliveness of it, the beingness of it. So just feel the sheer beingness of what's here, this life, the streaming forth of life in this instant. As I was saying at the outset, we often operate from this assumption, or this, maybe it's even a hypothesis or a belief, that there's something not quite right and it needs to be corrected. And then we go about trying to arrange our experience and our circumstance to be and to look a certain way that we imagine would be better somehow, or we've been taught, instructed would be better. But for now, I just invite a different perspective, which is that there's absolutely nothing that has to be corrected, nothing that has to be fixed. That there's not a single thing about you, about this moment, about the flow of experiencing that needs to be other than it is. In fact, there's not a single thing that can be other than it is. This is an extraordinary thing to let sink in, that this appearance is here absolutely immediately. It's just here, and in its appearance is exactly what it is, and it cannot be other than it is. Feel feel presence, the presence of here, the presence of this. It's actual, it's concrete, it's substantial in its presence, in its here-ness, in its existence. Undeniably here, palpably here. Something is here. Just feel the presence of it, the presence of what we can call life, the presence of reality. It can and does take countless and ceaseless different forms, doesn't it? It shows up always distinct, always different, always unique in its flavor and texture and quality in every instant. And yet it always simply is. life simply being. Just feeling the presence of this existence. Noticing that there's nothing obstructing it, there's nothing in the way of anything else. There's no walls, there's no doors, there's no edges, no boundaries, no seams in the fabric of this being. Whatever we may imagine ourselves to be, notice how there's no line separating what we might think of as ourselves and the whole of this field of being, this boundless field of being. There's no gap anywhere. No place where we come to some end and the rest of the field starts. There's just a seamless whole. What is this? What is this beingness? What is this? What is it made of? What is life made of? Here it is, palpably present, the sense of aliveness. What is that sense? What is it made of? Feel that. Feel the boundless, infinite nature of it. How bottomless it is, how ungraspable it is, how it has no limit, no point where we arrive at some conclusion of what it is. It's just an endless opening into more and more and more. All of it ultimately indescribable. It's completely full of itself, full of life. Nothing is missing. It's pure radiance, pure vitality, pure boundless potency and perfection, just as it is. And every single experience is inseparable from this basic aliveness, this basic ground, this groundless ground of existence. Ungraspable yet appearing as everything that we taste and touch and smell and remember and think about and feel and all of it. All the waves of experience entirely inseparable from, with no independent existence apart from this basic state, this groundless ground of being. this mysterious, miraculous presence that gives rise to everything, gives rise to this moment, this perception. So we don't need to correct the waves of experience to make them better, to make them somehow more awakened or more whatever we imagine we need to make them more of. We don't have to do that, because the waves are none other than the sea, the vast sea of being, the vast sea of existence itself, of being itself, of the presence, this radiating, ceaselessly radiating. I mean, there's just absolutely no words, right? There's no words to really, what is this? This absolute miracle of this, the miracle of this. And everything is none other than the miracle of this. So the perspective of something is out of place that needs repair about us or about the world is a fine perspective, and we can operate from within that perspective, and it's true from within that perspective, and there's no problem with it. And then there's this other perspective that we were just exploring, where it's absolute perfection and nothing is out of place and nothing is missing, and there's just this indescribable bounty. So when we feel the way in which what's present here is beyond definition, can you sense the way in which, from that perspective, experientially, not as a concept, but in your experience, the way in which this can't be collapsed into some, oh yeah, I know what it is now. The way in which this absolutely is not collapsible, doesn't collapse into a definition. We're, from that perspective, we're completely freed of all definitions and descriptions. And identities and well, that might be a good launching pad for any further exploration. If any folks would like to share anything or explore anything.
So what came up for me is the movie Groundhog Day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I just kept thinking of that, how he was resisting every single solitary thing. And then, when he just accepted it all and said that this moment is perfect, it transformed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Mm-hmm.
what was coming up for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels as if it transforms the reality when there's not when we kind of relax, when the habit of trying to turn this into something better is relaxed, and we we discover something about it through that, and we discover how it's actually way way better than we ever imagined. It's much deeper and richer, and that's its nature. And so it doesn't actually have to be improved upon. It's I mean, just look at the unbelievable intelligence of this, right? Of reality. It's just extraordinary, right? It's just
So I remember Adyashanti saying, it's like catching on to a hidden secret.
mhm,
Once you finally are in the now, like a continually in the now, it's like catching on to a hidden secret that what is average is extraordinary.
mhm.
What what is extraordinary.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And because ordinarily our notions of even like the way in which we create hierarchies of one thing is better than another thing, or more interesting or more extraordinary than another thing, is tends to be based on the way we're characterizing things, the way we're defining things, right? Those are all the categories we place upon the world of experience. And it's fine. Again, it's a perspective, and it's sometimes a useful perspective to make those kinds of delineations between pleasure and pain, and nourishing food and non-nourishing food, and relationships that we find resonant and ones that we find less resonant. So those distinctions and differentiations are wonderful. And again, it's a perspective, and one that we can operate within and do as humans. But we tend to be primarily familiar with that perspective and not this other perspective, which I would say is a transcendental perspective, in the sense that this experience, this reality, is entirely beyond those kinds of designations and descriptions. It doesn't fit into those categories, actually. It's too, well, it's infinite. So you can't put something that's infinite into a finite box of interpretation, right? And it is that discovery that you're talking about, of what transcends all the descriptions and definitions, just the sheer presence of this, the beingness of it, the isness of it, that we discover an entirely different realm of well-being, you could say, of extraordinariness, that doesn't have an opposite. It doesn't have a non-extraordinary opposite, or an opposite that's lacking in well-being. It's like it just doesn't, because its very nature is pure, perfect, absolute equanimity, absolute um, stability, absolute um, fulfillment.
To me, it's like removing the mental screen between a parent like you and the other person. And so, or this, the object,
Mm-hmm.
instead of having a mental screen there defining everything in that one present moment, you're completely present with whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost gives it a sacred quality.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can be in the grocery store and it will feel like you're walking on sacred ground if you're totally present.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is. I mean, it's recognizing, again. It's I talk oftentimes about perspectives, and there is one perspective that would say you and I are autonomous creatures that have our own existence. You have a history that's not my history, and so on, right? So that is a perspective. And from another perspective, though, I can actually feel the presence of experience itself. And if I feel, say, if I'm looking at you, what I would call you, and I feel it as experience, which is what it is, I'm experiencing what I might call you as experience. There's absolutely nothing resembling separation anywhere. There's just experiencing. There's just a field of experiencing. and there's complete absolute indivisibility there. There's nothing separating anything else. And yes, the feeling of that, the tone of that, the quality of that is one of um, yeah, it's like sacred ground for sure. That's why it's so powerful to just come back to the felt sense of experiencing itself, because that's where all that's the bounty to be discovered. It's just in experiencing itself. I mean, again, if you think about, spiritual seekers are trying to overcome the sense of division and separation and realize the undivided, inseparable, right? That I'm inseparable from whatever it is we're looking for, God or the ground of being. But in experiencing, you tell me if you can find any separation anywhere between one thing and another thing. There aren't things, there's just experiencing. Where are the things?
I think for me, when listening, like there's just this, um, and really like falling back into, I guess being aware of it, just experiencing. Like there's just this relief and openness, and just felt curiosity and glow and okayness. And I was listening, I did a group this morning, and it was Rupert Spira. It was discussing, talk of Rupert Spira, and
Mhm.
he's so hard to follow sometimes. But one thing he mentioned was breaking down the word existence.
Mhm.
And it was something like stand from, or and it helped me with like the nothing, feeling okay, or comprehending in a way like nothing exists, and the separation, or no thing exists.
Mhm.
um, but and then just with the experiencing, talking about feelings and concepts, and
Mhm.
I'm losing what I'm saying, but
I mean, sometimes people will talk about, like, say, thoughts and feelings as in a sense not existing actually. And I don't know if you meant this per se, or if he did, but um, what I would say is that everything that appears experientially exists, and
mm,
yet it's not what we imagine it to be. So if you conjure up some thought about what you're going to do, after the Zoom call, and you just conjure up that thought, there it is. It's present as a phenomena, an experiential flavor.
mm,
It's right there. It's palpable, recognizable as some kind of pattern of something that you can recognize, that can be recognized. And yet, when you go to investigate what it actually is, what's actually there, like, that's when it gets really trippy, because you can't really tell what it is that's there. It's there, but when you go to find it, you can't actually really find it, and yet it's there. So that's why they say in some of the Buddhist traditions that you can't say whether things are existent or non-existent, that neither of those categories actually apply, because the way reality is, it's much more it's much more magical than that, in a sense, or much less delineatable as being one way or another way. And that's actually our experience. Our experience is one of absolutely something's here, but you absolutely cannot tell what it is. So, well, what's going on there? Does it exist or does it not exist? Well, neither and both is what I would say.
I think hearing that for some reason, it helped me. I'm tired. Um, it helped me to feel, I guess, that trippiness, and to see that in a totally different way, and to in alignment with what you were saying. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just to break down that word, and then to just play with it, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I kind of applied what you just said, John, to this all this free floating anxiety with the election
Mm. Mhm.
and the pandemic. It's like everyone's talking about it, at least in my world.
Yeah.
The election, the whole world. Um, but then I, kind of thought about what you said about, all right, I'm feeling this anxiousness, this anxiety. And I could feel it maybe in my, I don't know, this tenseness in my body.
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, what is that? What is this tenseness? What is it made out of? And
Mhm.
I couldn't find any substance. There's no substance to the, just diving deeper, or like a thought will come like, oh my God, what if so and so wins the election? Diving into that thought, of, well, a thought, it's this little wisp. It's, there's nothing.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
the feeling of like fear, like, oh my God, going into the feeling, just the emotional part of it, and just realizing it's insubstantive. It's like a cloud that I can't grasp. So it's so helpful that, this experiential and diving deeper into these senses, that to find there's nothing there. And that the only thing that's constant is like the knowing of it.
Mhm.
There's only one constant.
Mhm.
So that was just a practical application of kind of what you've been sharing, the
Mhm.
books that that you've written. That's very helpful.
That's beautiful, Pam. Yeah, it's exactly, you're right there discovering that these things that based on our descriptions appear to be substantive, concrete things that are kind of holding still long enough to be called something. When investigated, that breaks down and you discover, I've used the same word, that very cloud-like, ambiguous, uncertain. Um, and there's a great freedom in that discovery because it's completely open-ended what it is. In a sense, it's it's strange because in a way it could sound like you're taking this complexity and reducing it to something sort of reducing it to something, and in a way you are. But in another way, that the reduction is not a diminishment of what it is, but as Kini was saying, it's like it's actually an enhancement of what it is, or it's a discovery of, wow, it's so much more there than our paltry descriptions make it seem to be.
It's almost a revelation.
It's a
It's
complete
revealed.
revelation. It's a complete, well, it's God is what it is, in the sense that, not to, put a word that might not really even mean anything on it, but it's just um, I mean, whatever it is that created all of this and is creating all of this instant by instant. I mean, go figure that one out, right? How is the universe being the universe of your experience right now? Let's just stick with that universe because that's the one you know. And all of its, I mean, right? It's just mind numbing, astonishing. And so in a very real sense, when we investigate our experience, we're beginning to touch something more primal about it, so something more elemental about it, its nature, more basic about its nature. And you mentioned the constancy of that knowing that underlies all the experience. And what I also invite you to explore, though, is even that sense of like, feel right now the sense of knowing this moment, the awareness of this moment, right? It's obvious. Awareness is shining, isn't it? This moment's being known, however you might be describing the moment. And so you could say that the knowing is a kind of constant thread running through everything. And I used to talk a lot about that in my work, and I don't anymore so much. And partly why is that notion of knowing or awareness can often become like another sort of place to land and imagine that you've arrived at some final conclusion about what it is. But just feel what you might call awareness or knowing. And just like being, you come up empty-handed trying to figure out what that is either. So actually, there is no landing place. Maybe awareness doesn't even exist. Maybe there's just this. It has no name.
So I was going to say I was studying Ho'oponopono as a tool
Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't present. So I did it as a continual tool in my mind. And then I was completely present. And I was in New Hampshire, and I went into the bathroom and I just suddenly said, the stupid lock is broken. So I broke out of being incongruent with what is. There was this anger, there was this frustration, like, and I got completely out of it. So I go to the restroom, and this man comes in, and I'm going to the restroom, and there was like this voyeuristic strangeness going on, and he didn't leave. And so when I finished, I went up and I just sat there and started laughing, and he ran. And I thought, the moment I got, like, I could now say, you know, this is wrong, let me go report him. Or I could say, the moment I get out of that, this other reality starts to appear that is not really one I'd want to be experiencing. So I just got right back in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading Michael Brown as well. And he says, when you're not in the moment, you're in psychological time. And that's like a continual hell. And it's like you miss life. You miss life. You're not present. So I just got right back in it. And I was walking down this aisle, and my feet just stopped, and there was this mustard that my son must have told me 12 times to get, and I forgot. So Michael Brown says, you don't need grocery lists anymore. You don't need, because you'll just live. It was like water flowing, and it will just, you'll just flow to where you're naturally supposed to go. And then you're so present, you don't miss anything about life. And then if you get out of it like I did, you'll notice what happens. It's like a very stark contrast. Does that make sense?
It does. I think that I think the only tricky thing is that that way of, I mean, it can be experienced in the way you're describing it, and it makes sense completely from, again, within that perspective. But there's another, I would say there's another perspective to play with, which is that even when, let's call it a less personal perspective. So let's say that as a seemingly individuated wave of existence, we can seem to move in and out of these different realities that you're describing. One where it feels as if there's much more contact with the immediacy of what's right here, and then another way in which that individualized wave-like expression that we are can go into interpretation and time travel and seem to lose touch with that immediacy. But from another perspective, there's just the totality of existence, and there aren't actually waves doing what we imagine we're doing as waves. And so this is like, I'll sometimes describe it as a presence that actually can't come and go, doesn't come and go, we never depart from, because from the perspective of the ocean, there's no individual life stream that can depart from the ocean of being, from the ocean of presence. There's just the ocean of presence, period, end of story. So even when we might say, oh, there I moved into some degree of interpretation, it's like, that's actually 100,000% God that did that. that did whatever we just described as moving into interpretation. That's the movement of, our entire life is the movement of the totality in all the different ways that can go. Now, from the human perspective, I'm not denying that it can feel different depending on sort of what we seem to be orienting to. So yes, when we're orienting more towards that sense of definition and separation and disconnection from the ground, it can be a different experience. There can be a different flavor to that. And when we kind of reorient to the perspective that I'm describing of inseparability, that feels different, doesn't it? It has a different tone to it, has a different quality to it. And maybe, as you were saying, a different sense of flow and ease to it. Absolutely. Because there's no, from that perspective, there's nothing missing. So there's a lot less pushing and grasping hold of, and because why would there be? There's just the flow of reality itself. So for me, it's a matter of kind of, because then there can be this really interesting thing where we might say we've gone off into some interpretation. We might describe it as that. And we're actually, there can be an increasingly recognition that there's no loss of anything even when that happens. We don't actually lose the ground ever because it can't be lost. And then there's this kind of sense of like bulletproof, like you can't ever leave that. It's the, nothing ever escapes the totality and becomes something other than the totality. Nothing ever escapes God and becomes non-God. So there's only that, only ever that. And so then from the human perspective, the recognition of that is a sense of great relief and a sense of great coming home, and the recognition that all there is home. Even when we're all tweaked out and torqued up about the election or something that somebody just said to us, it's like that moment is the shining forth of reality. And when there's not some effort to escape that or change it or correct it or alter it, it's recognized to be the absolute perfection that it is. Does that make sense? Yeah, and that's so it's kind of like freedom doesn't look a particular way, or it looks like this. It looks like this moment, and then the next moment. That's what freedom looks like. Freedom is this moment exactly as it is, in all the different forms and shapes that can take.
And that takes some undoing and unlearning because, you know, from a very early age, we're taught, you know, differently.
Yes.
In my life, you know, I was taught these experiences are good and these are bad, and, you know, just all this separation. And so this unlearning and this undoing is, it's a shift.
It is, because you're absolutely right. We've been trained, indoctrinated, just as humans. I don't know, you know, you can blame it on reality because reality's doing it all, but it's like we're just extensions of that fundamental reality. So it's its dance of exploring itself and discovering itself and seemingly missing itself and interpreting itself, trying to interpret itself. That's all the doing of life itself, obviously. What else is doing it all, right? So, but you're right that sense that this is why I was saying at the very outset, it's like this, it's a kind of a deep-seated belief almost in the collective psyche of humanity that there's something not quite right about this. And again, we could take that up as a hypothesis, and we tend to operate from that. And so we're trying to make it better. We're trying to make ourselves better. We're trying to make the world better. It's like, well, let's just consider this other possibility that there's absolutely everything about it is absolutely perfect in its fundament, in its basic nature. It's a little different, isn't it? There's nothing wrong about any experience, because every experience is made of, I wrote this the other day, that every experience is a doorway into infinity, because every experience is made of infinity. So that's it. Everything's a doorway. So there's no, from that perspective, there's no good or bad. There's just infinity, and everything's a doorway into that. So the states of mind that we think of as problems that we need to fix, through spiritual practice or whatever. It's like, we can do that and we can try to alter our experience so that it's more to our liking. And there's nothing, I mean, I do that, you know, I try to create more pleasurable experiences and circumstances all the time. But there's this, we have access to this other dimension, which is that none of that is necessary, because this is inconceivably perfect as it is. So a state like disappointment or heartbreak, or that we'd imagine is definitely evidence of something is broken that needs repair, is none other than the vast ocean of existence appearing as that wave-like moment of experiencing. That's what it really is in its depthless depths. And so it doesn't, from that perspective, it doesn't, it's already resolved itself. It's already. And one really powerful, I've said this before, like a broken record, but a real powerful kind of way to get at what I'm talking about, I think easy in a certain way, is to notice the dynamic nature of what's here. So whatever we imagine needs to be repaired is already resolved itself, because that's the nature of reality, is that it self-releases. In its very arising, it's no longer here. So that's the resolution of everything. In every instant, everything's perfectly resolved. It's always just presence. It never departs from being presence. So in that sense, that's what I mean by it's resolved. It doesn't have to become something different in order for it to be presence. It is presence. Whether it's sadness or happiness, it's presence. Which again doesn't mean we might not try to move from sadness to more joy as part of our human walk. You know, in the same way we might move from physical pain to try to remove the pain in some way and heal the pain in some way. That's all very fine and natural. But I'm talking about accessing another perspective where that transcends all those categories and delineations. And there's well, that's when there's the discovery that, you know, you're always home wherever you are. The home of being, simply being. No matter how the beingness is showing up, it just is. And that just is, don't take it for granted. It's like a gold mine. Simply being. The beingness of everything is it's impossible to describe. But it can be felt, and it is being felt in every moment. Just feel feel it now, the beingness of this moment. It's radiating. people talk about equanimity and trying to come to a place of equanimity in relationship to what's arising, right? A sense of peace with what's arising. But within everything that's arising is complete equanimity. Everything is simply being itself in perfect equipoise. So life itself is pure equanimity. It's not struggling with any of its appearances. It's simply being this. It's being this in perfect equanimity. And then it releases itself in perfect equanimity in every instant. So this moment is perfect equanimity without you having to do anything to make it equanimous. You don't have to do 30 years of spiritual practice to discover equanimity, because equanimity is the nature of reality. It just is that way. Reality is at rest within itself because it's just being itself. It can't move away from itself, so it's at rest within itself. Even when it's showing up as all this diversity, it's still just being itself, appearing as all this diversity, always at rest within itself, always at peace with itself, always in complete harmony with itself. Never pushing or pulling, but simply being.
John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I got a little sense that you implied maybe that there's a doer here or a chooser here. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Can you say more about what you're responding to in particular, about a doer or chooser?
You said something like, well, that doesn't mean you don't do something to make yourself feel better,
Oh,
or
yeah.
that, like I have choice.
Yeah, well, I mean, choice is like every other designation. You can't really say whether there's choice or no choice. It's beyond both those categories, which resolves the whole dilemma: is there choice or no choice? Right? Because you could say, like, well, if I were to say, Pam, if I was in your house with you or something, and I was thirsty, I say, could you go get me a glass of water? Is like, you're gonna say, I'm sorry, I have no choice, I can't go do that right now. It's like, because I'm helpless, I have no volition. It's like, no, you would just go get up and get the water. And even if it was choiceless, in the sense that basically there wasn't really a separate individual doing that per se, because you're not a separate wave, but you are the entirety of the sea. And from the entirety of the sea, there's no individual choosers and doers. But nevertheless, just get up and get the glass of water anyway, even if that's true. Do you see what I mean? It's like, so reality is free apparently to appear all sorts of ways, including as people that imagine themselves to have agency, and all of that's fine. It's just, it's not, it's a little bit like anything that I might try to describe with words is really bullshit, because the words don't hold up under scrutiny, as I always say, right? So in some ways I could never say anything and I should just be quiet, right? But I can go ahead and use words to try to convey something about, aspects of experiencing and perspectives that we can explore about what's here, apparently. But every single one of those, yeah, I mean, volition's a perfect one. It's like, so I'm going to choose, I have agency that I can pick up the water and, let's see, am I going to drink it or not drink it? I'll drink it, Is that an exercise of a certain kind of choice, right? Kind of. I mean, it feels that way, and from one perspective, and then from another perspective, I have no idea where that impulse came from to drink it. Not really. I can't trace it back to the beginningless beginning of the impulse. And because I can't trace it back, I could also say from another perspective that there's no choice, no agency whatsoever. one thing I would say about choice and about volition and all that choosing and kind of stuff, that question is that like if I invite people, as I am always doing, to like just feel their experience, it's like, again, like going up and getting the glass of water, you can do that seemingly. You can feel your experience. And the fact that there's not maybe ultimately a separate individual who's enacting that, because there's no dividing lines anywhere, there's just the movement of life. Who cares? It's like you still can do that. Because in a way, you're not the doer and you're the sole doer, because you are the only thing that exists, aren't you? I don't mean you as Pam per se, but you as the entirety of the reality of your experience. And so whatever is doing this, right? Whatever's doing this moment, creating this moment, enacting all of it, the intelligence underlying it, seemingly, all of that is what you are, what each one of us is made of. So in that sense, you are the doer. It can be a little bit more of an empowering sort of place to come from, I think. I mean,
John,
sometimes, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, go ahead.
No, please, Chris. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it reminds me in your teaching how you talk about reality, you know, the kind of the simultaneous, instantaneous
Mm-hmm.
nature of that. What's appearing is always changing. It's always in constant movement.
Mm-hmm.
So, like for instance, if I think, okay, do I want coffee or tea?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do I want coffee or tea is, you know, actually a thought, but the decision is made in between when there's just this movement of relaxation. I have to actually come out of the thought or something. There's a pause, a recognition, or that actually the thought, like it's almost apparent as if the thought of tea or coffee or me appears to be a solid entity. But in order for the actual apparent choice to be made,
Mm-hmm.
I actually have to kind of let go of the thought and recognize kind of the dynamics in order for whatever's making the choice, whether, you know, it's me or the appearance of me as reality actually has to kind of, you know, I can't go, do I want coffee or tea, and make the decision when I'm contracted into the thought. There actually has to be a cessation of it, or an apparent release of the thought and then, oh, I want coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't know if.
Well, what's so, you know, kind of, I think sometimes challenging with all of this is that the way we talk about things is in a very kind of linear sort of time bound sort of way, that this leads to that in a kind of a sequential cause effect sort of way. But actually, again, perspective wise, we can look at the world in terms of cause and effect, but experientially, we don't experience cause and effect. We experience the instant. And it was without cause. It's just here. There's no build up to this moment. Because where is that build up? There's only this instant. So everything is happening in an immediacy. And it's fun to play with these perspectives because it opens up like I don't know, it's almost like we get to partake of more of the multidimensionality of this amazingness that we find ourselves in. And one, to this point about the immediacy, I mean, just feel now. Just exactly now. Absolutely nothing before, nothing after, but this pointless point of just now. It's almost like you're drilling down into like, where is that immediacy? Like, when is it? When is it now? Well, it's always now. But it's amazing to feel the way in which there's no time. And yet from this absolutely, you cannot find now, can you? It's such a point that it's like it has no duration. It's like no point there. There's nothing there. There's no time. And yet out of that pointless point, we have the whole stream of time, don't we? I was listening to music this morning and I was reflecting on like, well, when am I hearing? Because there's this sense of this melody, this flowing melody kind of lingering over this wash of time. Like a melody is, I'm a musician, and melody is happening over time. The song has time in it, in a sense, right? It's like telling a story of, the melody's telling a story in a sense. But I was like feeling the same thing of like the pointless point of like, when am I experiencing this actually? And it was really like wild, because it was a simultaneous sense of, all there is this like flash of sound, but it's not even here for an instant. It's just sound. There's no melody. There's just this point, right? There's no story because there's no time. And yet I could feel the way in which that was spread out seemingly. The timelessness was spread out over time. And so I got to experience also the melody flowing over seemingly over time, over the course of time. So it was like living in two worlds of, there's no time and there's time. And that's what it feels like.
So I was studying Dr. Hawkins once, David
Mhm.
Hawkins, and he said that there was a study they did where I hooked him up to machines or something, and it was like a baseball player and they're going to hit the ball.
Mhm.
But they figured out through these studies that the decision to hit the ball happened before. And so he was saying he lived in Arizona and he saw a rabbit and he pressed on the brakes, and then his ego took on the credit. But he said from that study, the decision was already made. It's like really mind blowing to start to get out of that Newtonian linear thing and to realize it's everything. And then your mind will think, I made that decision.
Right. Right. It's almost like in the metaphor of the music that I was listening to, it's like the melody has, this was what I was tripping out on, is that the melody has, how do you know a melody? It's like you have to have memory for there to be melody. So, but it's only be experienced now, because experience can't happen in a past or a future because it doesn't exist. So experience is happening right now. And yet, how am I hearing melody? So in a way, the past and the future, they're absolutely happening now. So that memory is woven into now, and the flow of time is woven into now, apparently. So it's like, it's very paradoxical, because it's like I could say that I'm existing, in a kind of linear sort of, right? Like that I have a history, that I've lived a life of however many years, but to return to like, that's a narrative, and it's okay as a perspective. It has its own validity again from within that. It's like if I put on, my sunglasses here, if I put on my glasses and they're colored a certain way, I'm putting on that perspective, and the world is that way from that perspective of those glasses that I have on. But it's like I'm inviting us to take the glasses off and kind of go to this raw level of experience. And in the same way that time can be seen to be not the whole story, space is the same way. It's like, is this really spatial? I mean, feel presence of what's here. And then ask yourself, where is it spatially? Is there space? Because space would suggest that there's dimensionality, that there's a here separate from a there. That's the only way you could have space, right? If there's only here, there's no space, right? Just feel that. It's not abstract. Feel here. Where's here? Well, it's here. It's right here. Okay. So, all right, now imagine that so I'm here and you're seemingly over there on the other side of wherever you're somewhere else. You're not here. Yeah, so I'm looking at there, or I'm feeling over there. And where is my looking happening? The looking is happening here. The feeling of you over there is happening here. So is there any here and there in experience? And yet it just like the song can show up as a stretched out melody over seeming time, this dimensionless, non-spatial, if you will, experiencing. I would suggest it's from this perspective, it's not spatial, it's not dimensional. Shows up as unbelievable dimensionality and sense of spaciousness and spaces between things and between people and between objects. So it's like, well, which one is it? It's like all of the above and none of the above. Whatever that is, D or E on the multiple choice. All of the above, none of the above. Because it's beyond description. To me, it's like, as an artist, it's like there's something that's just aesthetically so beautiful about that paradox. I don't know why. To me, I feel it as a kind of beauty that something is, the beauty of like that I know what this is and I can describe, elements of it, and then I can't actually know what it is. And that both of those are true and neither of them are true. Why? I don't know why. I find that beautiful. Like magical, just magical. That I'm a human and I'm entirely beyond anything called a human.
John, can you hear me?
Oh, hi, Michael.
Hi, good morning. I thought I missed your class, but I was saved by daylight savings time.
That's good.
I've fallen into this routine of sometimes watching YouTube videos to the wee small hours of the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And along that line, watching lately, I've just been going back down Guru memory lane. Not that I was not directly connected with Andrew Cohen, and I had some interest in Da Frijan in the early days, but I didn't. It was just very brief. But anyway, Andrew Cohen, he was interviewed by Rick Archer, Buddha at the Gas Pump, 8 years ago, and he said he initially felt that the power of his transmission, or whatever you would call it, his presence, would be sufficient to sort of zap people into some quality of awakened life, and he saw over time didn't seem to really work that way. He had a falling out with Punjaji because Punjaji saw it as an all at once, or you get it or you don't. And Andrew Cohen he felt people needed to do practice and integrate. And Da Frijan, I think initially similar. He thought people would just experience the presence of God, and that would be sufficient. And then he developed a whole protocol. So where are you in this sort of in the context of that debate or that discussion?
Yeah.
How do you? Because you're definitely I definitely feel a quality of presence or transmission from you. It's very, very, very tangible. So, but how do you see the function of that in
Mm.
terms of, say, an ongoing, or would you tend to see it as more immediate, or yeah, I think you get the general gist of my question.
I think that if there really even are mechanics to how people come to discover what they discover in life, it's, both as a psychologist and a teacher of the stuff that I'm sharing, on these calls. It may sound like a cop out, but I'm just going to say it's mysterious, Michael. The process is, I don't think there's an algorithm. I don't think there's rules necessarily, even if there might be, you could say stereotypical ways that people's development unfolds. I don't even know about that. I just think it's so individual what might touch one person. I mean, I really marvel with my grad students who I'm introducing a lot of these concepts to and inquiries with, and it's so variable. This one woman, she might have been the last person in the world that I thought would sort of get what I'm talking about, and it's completely blowing her mind. I mean, she's feeling the liberating nature of this investigation. It's extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
How come? What about her? Whereas another person would be like, "What is this guy talking about?" So it's so individual, both the extent to which one might, why do you resonate with much of, say, what I'm sharing, whereas another person might not? I mean, it's very individual. Why is that? They're the same words, right? But something about your being and your whatever, the openness of life is expressing itself through you, that resonates with it, and it touches something and connects, opens you up to your own investigation of this in the ways that it does. And as to how that then unfolds, over time, over seeming time, and how much, you could say, support one might seemingly need to continue to deepen in their understanding and their exploration. I think it's just highly individual, Michael. And I don't, I feel like I have a desire as somebody who's sharing about these things to have it be, to keep pointing people back to where the real juice is, which is their own experience. That's really the teacher. Your experience, our experience, is what's teaching us every instant about its nature. Its open, undivided, ever radiating, ever present nature. It's showing us that every instant. So as a teacher of this, I'm trying to direct people back to notice that about their own experience. But the beautiful thing is that we always have that experience. It's always here. It's always the shining forth of experiencing is ever present as each instant of our lives. And so we carry that, the Sat Guru, if you will, which is experience itself. It's there always, revealing its nature. And yes, teachers can seem to be able to sometimes help to catalyze the recognition of that to some degree, and support people in continuing to notice that that is in fact always the case, no matter how the experience seems to be being described. What it is in its basis is always this wide open, pure radiance, always.
Well, so on Thursday, I think it was this past Thursday, somebody asked Peter Brown during his satsang, it was toward the end of the meeting, the person said, was a gentleman, he said, are you aware of a power, are you aware of your effect on people? The presence that's communicated. And Peter said yes. And Andrew Cohen, he said when he came back from India after being with Papaji, that he noticed people just spontaneously went through the same type of process that he did. It was very intense, and
Mhm.
You know, Hal Blacker said that
Mhm.
he experienced that.
Mhm.
So, and somebody in the Donna Friedman community said it was overwhelming to the nervous system. Like that person didn't feel that he could always handle it. So,
Mhm.
you know, this type of transmission dynamic is very powerful.
Mhm.
You know, Peter, he became discombobulated after being with his first teacher.
Yeah.
It took him years to integrate what had happened.
Mhm.
So, it seems like it's a very, I mean, even you're extremely relaxed and very gentle, but this is a fiery,
Mhm.
or at least for me, because I'm confronting a lot of obstacles. It's
Mm.
like a very fiery,
Mhm.
very somewhat treacherous, or
Mm.
it can be because the same energy that can help my mind to move forward can also uh, cause me to stumble. It's sort of a
Mm.
tantric type of thing.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Is that, you know, what you're inviting me to do? I can't do it directly. I do it. It's like I receive what you're offering, and then it's processed through my own
Mhm.
inquiry, which is something that is volitional.
Mhm.
I'm disposing my mind in a certain way to uh, come up against
Mhm.
everything that would be contrary to what you're pointing to. But it
Mhm.
takes a certain degree
Do
of.
you find though that there's times where um, you know, a way in which I might direct your attention to notice something about your experience, let's say, um, and how, you know, a simple thing like to notice, to feel the presence of it, and to notice how when you investigate your experience, you don't arrive at some limit, you don't arrive at some actual, oh, I've I've arrived at what it is. I've come to a conclusion about what it is. So if I say words like that, let's say, and then that catalyzes you to, or inspires you to look at your experience in that way, right? And you can start to get a sense of its more indefinable, unresolvable, indeterminate, right, inconceivable nature, and you can start to feel that, right? Do you find
Yeah,
that that's something that just on your own, you, without my words being there to remind you that,
mhm.
in a sense, um, it can arise for you spontaneously on your own, that kind of remembrance, in a sense?
Usually only with some type of support.
Uh-huh.
They're listening to. I have DVDs and now I have YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
So if I watch Peter, or I watch
Mm-hmm.
a Dzogchen teacher,
Mm-hmm.
or I listen to your music,
Mm-hmm.
you know, something that will tend to bring my um, energy of my mind back
Yeah.
to the heart, and so
Mm-hmm.
the primary experience for me is um, a sort of uh, like a tranquility,
Mm-hmm.
which is the opposite of a sort of default mode of
Mm-hmm.
the agitation of
Mm-hmm.
my mind being
Mm-hmm.
just agitated and
Mm-hmm.
spinning. It's the distinctive quality of coming to rest. Uh, and not it doesn't even seem so much cognitive, because
Mm-hmm.
you know I've heard all these teachings for years. My mind is sort of jaded to it. It's more like, okay, now I'm beginning to feel some peace,
Mm-hmm.
and a sense of resting in beingness, and that's in terms of not knowing what anything is. Even to run that through my mind is like too much work at this point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately not a cognitive, you know, it's, I think, I mean, some of it's, again, it's very individual, Michael, and you may just find that your particular, whatever karmic, you know, wiring is such that you have some strong whatever defaults. I mean, I think we all do, based on what we've learned and what we've come to believe to be the case, right, about life. And, I was saying at the outset of the call, I'm not sure if you had gotten on the call yet, but about how, conventional sort of reality default is that basically there's something wrong that has to be fixed about this. And so I'm offering, and we operate kind of from that vantage point a lot of the time. And so we're trying to do something to micromanage our experience to make it seemingly better, closer to whatever ideal we have imagine it should be like. And I think the essence of what I'm sharing is inviting people to explore is, a 360 degree or 180 degree, whatever other perspective, which is there's absolutely nothing but absolute perfection in everything as it is. And
Well, John,
and that can be, I'll finish this thought that
sure.
no question about it, that at the level of the way we describe things, that sounds like a ludicrous proposition, of course, because no, there's pleasure and there's pain and there's things that are difficult and things that are easier and moments of agitation and moments of calm. So yeah, at the level of description, it's bullshit what I'm saying. But I'm talking about another level that is sort of underneath the descriptions, that is really the pure presence of what's here, that can be, just by feeling it, can be discovered to transcend the descriptive categories, just flat out, just absolutely. You can feel this moment, and even if you're describing it conventionally, one is describing it as difficult or uncomfortable, that is one perspective, and there's this other perspective, and that other perspective is, it is beyond that designation. It transcends that designation, and that's where the freedom lies. And I think it's that simple. And if you find that it's helpful to you to hear people reminding you of that, which is obviously part of why you're tuning into the calls, because I've said this to you before. I mean, you can continue to do that, continue to make use of whatever you find helpful. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would say this to you, which is and I know this from our many conversations, that just a caution to not undersell how much I think you actually understand this in a very profound way in your own experience. I really feel that in my bones. And I don't think one wouldn't have the resonance that you have with it unless you did. Then it would just be an intellectual curiosity. But you have an access to it in your own experience. I mean, we all do, but I think you have a conscious recognition of it. And I would just encourage you to, let yourself really appreciate that, like that knowing in yourself, the depth of that you always carry with you, even when it seems to be lost sight of and forgotten. And if that happens, then you can tune in and get reminded of that other perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate that, John. Thank you. A very, very quick final thought.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think my family ever had one, but I know in the old days there was a scale, a mechanical scale, like for weighing, like if you're cooking so much flour, so many grams or whatever flour.
Mm-hmm.
And it was two little plate things, and it, like a teeter totter. And you remember that it was probably the 1800s, just like a kitchen scale,
mm-hmm.
and it has two things, and they're hanging by it, like a chain, a sort of chain support.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it's in balance, both holders or plates, whatever those things are called, will be at the same level.
Mm-hmm.
But if you put, say, metal pellets on one side, one side will go all the way down to the counter.
Mm-hmm.
So the mental afflictions are, they cause the mind to be out of balance. And in my case, taken me years to even be able to recognize that I'm out of balance. Like when you live with imbalance, that's all you know. So you don't even have a clear reference point.
Mhm.
So your gracious presence and Peter's and my other spiritual friends helping me to at least maybe there's no light at the end of the tunnel yet, but at least recognize so I can recognize when I'm in the tunnel. That's a big step.
Mhm. Yeah, you are you are the tunnel. I mean, you're the absolute reality, Michael. What else could you possibly be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you, John.
Yeah, it's great to hear your voice always.
I wanted to say something that, so Byron Katie, they told her she was going blind and there's nothing that they could do about it. And she just said, I've always wanted a dog. So she's been a great teacher of mine in that she just says, when we argue with reality, we lose, but only 100% of the time. And she went to visit somebody in the hospital and they were just sobbing and they had one leg that was really swollen and Byron Katie just said, you have the story that leg should look like your other leg. And the lady just burst out laughing. So it's like, not that you're not going to do whatever medicinally that needs to be done to help your leg, but it's just that perspective of what is, the piece of what is. And when she said that, she just immediately said, I've always wanted a dog, or somebody put a gun in her back and she just said she had this thought, oh, is this how she ends? And then from that perspective, she started having this really calm conversation. It's just that, or that voyeur person in the bathroom, there's this other perspective where you can come, like, this shouldn't be happening, or you can come into this point of, this is what is, and be in total congruence with it.
Absolutely. And that's as we were touching on a little bit today, that's the I'm that image, I come back to it so often. I mean, I'm a water person, I guess, but it's like there's an ocean of reality. It's oceanic. It's so vast, and like the physical ocean that we know, what does it do? Oceans do one thing: they make waves, right? They create waves. They give forth waves, and the ocean of reality is giving forth, if you will, shining forth as all these waves of experiencing. And so the flavors of the ocean, and sometimes those flavors can feel uncomfortable and be described as difficult and afflictive, as Michael was saying. And the habit we have, and it is a strong habit in the human psyche, to try to rectify that, to correct it, to make it better. And the experiment, an aspect of the experiment of what I'm inviting is, what happens when there is absolutely no effort to correct anything about anything? And it is one powerful way to discover that those waves, even the ones we imagine are afflictive and difficult and we imagine are in need of repair, are none other than the arising of the absolute reality, the ocean of existence. They are its expression. And from that perspective, it absolutely changes the whole sense of them, like you were saying. It changes the sense of what is, because you recognize it is the fundamental. I mean, as I said to Michael, you are the absolute reality. You're not actually a separate wave trying to find the absolute reality, even though it feels that way to us. We all know what that feels like. But you are the absolute reality. And every experience of you that you associate with your living a human life is none other than absolute reality. What else could it possibly be? It is the absolute reality. And it's difficult to discover that when we keep trying to correct it and make it better and improve upon it, or fix it or avoid it, and instead we're helpless anyway because it already is here. So we're kind of late to the party when it comes to accepting things. It's already here. It's like reality already made it. So there's no doing anything about it. And it's already gone on to the next thing anyway. So that's how liberated reality is in every instant. It's becoming something different. So there's complete freedom in the pure immediacy of this, and the pure transiency of it. There's complete freedom because it just, whatever it is we imagine, it's just gone, 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 gone. And there's something new, something new, something new. Every instant, a complete reset. The universe hits the reset button, fresh start every instant. Is that amazing? Every instant, boom, a new universe with no history. That may be a good note to end on. Thank you all for joining, as always. Such a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you down the road, one form or another. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, John.